So without further ado, let's get on with it. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Matt Carmichael, Senior Vice President and Editor of What the Future. Matt, you have the floor.
Thanks, Ellen. Since it's the top of the hour, we're going to pause for station identification from my friend from What the Future Music, last month's issue, KEXP's John Richards.
This is DJ John Richards on WTF with Matt Carmichael, where the future matters.
So hey, I'm Matt Carmichael, editor of What the Future, the monthly magazine from your friends at Ipsos. Each month we tackle the future of a different topic, and this month we are tackling the future of reality. No biggie. Or actually, it is a biggie. This is the largest issue we've ever done. Most Q&As, it's going to be fantastic. I can't wait to walk you through it and introduce you to all the great people we spoke to and show you all of the great data we collected. As we're getting settled in, I'll tell you that I was around in the early days of the web, and I heard a lot of the same things that I'm hearing today, that in terms of virtual reality and mixed reality, there's a lot of complaints and a lot of trepidation and a lot of discussion about, oh, the technology has so far to go and the bandwidth is an issue and the hardware is clunky and everything is confusing and how will this ever catch on? And all of that same stuff was happening in the early days of the web as well. And there were people like myself who saw the potential, who thought maybe someday these tech issues will go away. And maybe we focused a little more on the positive than we should have and didn't think about some of the negative consequences. And that might be a good cautionary tale as we go through today's discussion. But I want to start with our premise. And our premise is this, that while the future is entirely uncertain, it is really likely that as we move forward, a lot of these technical problems will be overcome. And that as we move forward, we will spend more time in these places, these virtual spaces, these immersive worlds of virtual and augmented and mixed reality. So that's the place we're starting from. We want to start thinking about what that world looks like. And it turns out the future is out there. You just have to use your imagination. Now, back in the 80s, people had little pins, buttons, that they would wear on especially their denim jackets. And I met a girl once who had a pin that said, "Reality is for people who lack imagination." And as I put this issue together, that phrase stuck with me. Came back and I kept thinking about how imagination is going to be key to unlocking a lot of these future realities. The genesis of this quote is a little bit in dispute. Some people think it was Hayao Miyazaki, the Japanese animator and founder of Studio Ghibli. It's also been attributed to a scientist from the 1920s, John Burton Sanderson Haldane, who, among other things, invented the concepts of primordial ooze and helped with the underlying philosophies that led to IVF. I'm going to go with Miyazaki just because it gives me a chance to bring in Studio Ghibli imagery, and that will impress my children. But at the time, I thought this reality for people who lack imagination was just a really cool sentiment on a button worn by a cute girl. R.I.P. Kristen. Now, we're already at a point where imagination and reality are colliding. These images here are from Midjourney, which is an AI art engine. The prompt to use it is literally just imagine. And then you tell it what you want it to create. So this is a family I had it create. I gave it a prompt of show me a cyberpunk woman, show me a steampunk future guy, and show me a future cyberpunk child. Almost nothing more. And the AI created these images. Then I gave it something more fanciful. Show me what a hunting party for rainbow unicorns would look like. And this is maybe a little darker, but here it is, generated from an AI based on my imagination, but also the AI's. Now imagine a world where maybe that future isn't so great, where people are using these not just for whimsical and fanciful, but for other purposes as well. Imagine if creating deepfake videos was this easy. We've already had a case where someone created a deepfake video of Ukrainian president, and it was a surrender video. He was urging Ukrainians to lay down their arms. And this spread so fast and was just realistic enough that President Zelensky had to go and create a counter video where he stood very obviously in Kyiv and said, "No, do not surrender. I am still in the capital. We are still fighting." And that's already happening. So what is the future of reality? What of these fabricated realities and how they will impact our actual reality? Or where even would those lines fall between actual and fabricated and virtual and real? These are some of the questions we're going to explore today. So let's dive in. The future of reality will depend heavily on technology and what we do it. Just as important will be how people leverage its potential for new experiences for the masses. Can we create these new realities? There'll be more than just digital twins of our lives. When we think about the future of a topic, when we're planning an issue of what the future, we'd like to think about all of the space around whatever our center topic is. So when we're looking at the future of reality, we're thinking, of course, about all these technology issues, about software and platforms and hardware and AI. We're thinking about commerce. We're thinking about mollification and currency. We're thinking about how this will redefine omnichannel by creating entirely new channels for us to be buying and selling and shopping and consuming in. We're thinking about the consumers, always the humans, thinking about community, thinking about privacy, thinking about how you build trust in these virtual spaces where, like I just said, you can create things that aren't real. And we're thinking about how brands create connections in those issues of trust. We're thinking about the geopolitics of it all, about nationalism, about regulation, about who will regulate these virtual spaces. Will it be things like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, where the groups are essentially self-governing? Where will actual government regulation fit in? These are huge issues. Another huge issue is where diversity, equity, and inclusion fit in. As we are creating new languages and new norms and new mores and new worlds, how do we make sure that we're creating those for everybody and places where we all feel comfortable taking part? And finally, we're thinking about the media and the institutions. We're thinking about disinformation, as we've started talking about, and we'll close this discussion with later. We're thinking about entertainment and where public figures fit into all of this. And so using these tools of foresight, we start to lay out the discussion and where this issue is going to go. We also are always thinking about our theory of change and how that plays in. So on the left, we're thinking about the macro forces that will impact the future of reality. And those are the big kind of tectonic plates that shift over time, but are sometimes accelerated by events. On the right, we're thinking about the signals, today's expressions of what's going on in the world. It might be headlines, it might be new patents, it might be new technologies being developed, new regulations. We don't necessarily, as futurists, know what those things are going to mean, but we know they're going to mean something. And in the center, we are always thinking about the shifts in society, markets, and people. In other words, we always keep the humans at the center of things. And these are the things we're thinking about as we think about the future of any topic. But as we think about the future of reality, we want to think about all of these things and how they apply. From there, we figure out who we're going to talk to. And who better to start this discussion with than the guy who has literally now written the book on the metaverse. Investor Matthew Ball, his essays in the last couple years on the metaverse are about as influential as any writing on the topic. As the managing partner of Epleon, he's invested in a lot of winners: Genvid Technologies, The Athletic, Dapper Labs, Dave's Hot Chicken, Pushkin Industries, and more. And this book that I just mentioned, The Metaverse, takes his thinking even further by asking how virtual web will evolve, what players will shape that evolution, who will govern these spaces, and how. One type of governance that's evolving in the metaverse and crypto worlds is membership-driven, decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. Ball points out that membership doesn't have to be bought. Members receive tokens based on whatever that group finds valuable: money, time, member referrals, etc. And he sees arguments on both sides of how effective DAOs can be. But one thing he's clear on: governments must be involved too. He's hopeful that they'll be helpful. We're all smarter about the significance of change, he says. And that's why there's so much interest in the investment community, as well as from regulators. But one key question is about how it will grow. And here's how Ball thinks that will happen. It involves some of our favorite concepts, including creativity and humans. Here's what he told me.
And so when you look forward towards the metaverse, the dominant theory is that improving the tools which enable creation is the foremost requirement. Why? Because yes, higher bandwidth speeds enables more dynamic experiences. Greater processing power enables better graphics. Semantic recognition allows for more complex real-time translation. But at the end of the day, most of the virtual world has grown with creativity. And creativity is to some extent the number of inputs into the system. And so making it so that more people can create better, more easily, faster, tends to be the most important thing that can be done.
My initial point about the early days of the web relates to the classic field of dreams problem. If you build it, will they come? And Ball thinks that one way to ensure they do is to make it easier for people to build. With more than 20 years of experience at some of the biggest platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and currently Activision Blizzard, Jonathan Stringfield has participated in the rise of online gaming worlds. With a PhD in sociology, he knows a lot about people. His new book is about how brands can leverage these platforms and how they can't. The metaverse intrigues him, but he points out that gaming companies have a lot of experience making 2D pretty cool too. Stringfield thinks the future is, well, mixed. The 2D spaces are already immersive, as any gamer will attest, and 3D virtual spaces might get there if the tech advances. There's a human problem, though. People need a reason to take part, he says. And the other part of the context problem is that the brand experience has to match the world. His mantra: does it make sense? When he thinks about the field of dreams problem, he thinks that game developers will put their 60-year head start to work. Here's what he told me.
What we're finding is that it's this whole kind of ROI phenomenon, right? Both the expense and candidly putting this cumbersome thing on my head. Am I getting any better of an experience than I would on a flat screen? Because again, game developers for 60 some odd years have become very good at initiating that whole spatial presence thing just based on a flat screen. So I think when we talk about access and what have you, the seminal question is going to continue to be, is the experience that I can get from any of these technologies any better than this shard of glass that I carry in my pocket, that I can access the infinite knowledge of the universe from, or a screen here relative to all of the hoops you have to jump through to do it? Game developers think about that a lot. Folks building these virtual worlds now, less so, because I think they're just trying to jump to the new cool technologies and what have you.
Virtual worlds in gaming make the most sense today, as Stringfield says. Yet many factors influence interest in the immersive web that go beyond gaming, according to a new Ipsos immersive study. People who describe themselves as creators or influencers are the most interested in immersive spaces. They're doubly likely to own cryptocurrency than the average person. And devices also matter. Those who own an Oculus headset are significantly more enthusiastic. that could hold the key to scaling Web3 and immersive worlds, says Nicole Massa, Senior Vice President and Head of Gaming Strategy at Ipsos North America. She says, brands need to tap engaged groups to be ambassadors to friends and family, and to move people from aware to active, we need to ensure the highest quality user experiences. Lindsay McInerney helped bring mega brewer AB InBev into the metaverse with a project for Stella Artois. She recently co-founded an entertainment company with actor Mila Kunis and other crypto blockchain enthusiasts. In all her work, Lindsay McInerney thinks about new roles for brands in new spaces. She sees Web3 as a way to bring creators and audiences closer together and envisions a place for brands to play authentically. Again, just as Stringfield says that people need a reason to join new realities, McInerney thinks brands do too. And the timing of early adoption is tricky, she says. But say we get there. Say brands and people find their reasons to be in the metaverse. What does that world start to look like? For now, she thinks that will look a lot like existing worlds.
The metaverse or digital worlds, I think very much right now will parallel reality for a couple of reasons. One, that's where most of our minds are at. It's difficult to conceive outside of what you don't know. And so, we live on planet Earth. And so we're very likely to design things that reflect and resemble sort of what we know. And you already sort of see this with the way different universes and worlds are popping up. They can be enhanced because I do think people are taking advantage of cool things like the fact that there's no gravity or there isn't physics in general. And of course, you can be very, very much more creative. But even if you create a whole new world of flora and fauna that doesn't exist in reality, you're still creating something that very much exists in reality. And that's like plants and trees and that sort of thing. And so even if you look at video games for the past however long, there's often components that really just bear out a similar world to the one we live in.
Earlier, I talked about having more creators will help grow the virtual spaces. Lowe's clearly agrees. The home improvement chain recently launched Lowe's Open Builder, which provides virtual and AR creators free 3D assets of real-world home and decor products to use in their own worlds. Josh Shabtai, Senior Director at the Labs, discusses the challenges of developing VR and AR and how skill building could be the killer app that accelerates virtual commerce. To build immersive experiences that can scale, he believes that building skills and expertise across generations may be the thing that makes VR and AR palatable for mass audiences. With competing visions on what the future world looks like, Shabtai sees a role for brands and retailers that are not inherently selling technology as a product or service to make that future more useful to a wider audience. Liz has tested some of these features in the background and some out in the open. And now shopper research is catching up to offer companies more options for both. Lowe's and other companies we are talking about today are clearly early adopters. Some of that work that brands are doing in these spaces will be hits. Some won't. Despite having a first mover advantage, companies experimenting in these spaces are opening themselves to a commercial world that they don't know will work, says Alison Shaltis, the global president of Omnichannel Journey at Ipsos. In other words, it's too easy to be tech first, shopper second, and totally miss the mark. So how can brands develop engaging and effective immersive shopping experiences? How should they look to the shopper? And how do we get people to enter the shop and guests to linger and enjoy and buy? How do we get them to spread the word to their real and virtual friends? Ipsos is soon launching an immersive version of SimStore that evaluates shopping behavior in both physical and virtual environments virtually. Brands and retailers will be able to test different concepts and programming in and beyond the virtual web in a closed, safe, and confident way. We've used the term metaverse a lot today, and will continue to, and it's still a term that's finding its definition. Meta's chief product officer, Chris Cox, has said that it's the next generation of the internet where things get, quote, less flat. Meta's Asher Rapkin expands on that. Moving through mixed reality, augmented reality, and into fully immersive virtual reality, People can have both similar and different experiences with different levels of fidelity. The potential is limitless. So how do we get more people and brands playing in and doing business in this space? Whatever definition of the metaverse you understand today, Rapkin acknowledges that it will evolve as it matures. For businesses, that means understanding that virtual experiences are going to require new ways of doing things, much like internet marketing has evolved since the early days of brochure on websites. He says brands should subscribe to the idea that good commerce follows good art. We can't just create virtual analogs of things that exist. We have to introduce something new, he says. Then, he says, we need to watch and listen to the consumers and determine how to iterate from there. We'll figure it out, he says. He also says that we should be paying attention to all future forms of reality. Here's what he told me.
We talk a lot as an industry about augmented reality, because that's obviously at scale, and virtual reality, because I think that's where we go when we think about the metaverse. But in between the two is a really fascinating place that we don't spend a lot of time, but I do believe there's a tremendous amount of creative potential, which is mixed reality. And this idea of re-rendering the world around us to create something fundamentally distinct from both the physical and the virtual world. I think it's one of the areas of the metaverse that's least understood, but offers some of the most creative potential. We're leaning into this with Project Cambria and other products, and other folks are as well. But I would encourage people in the industry to spend some time familiarizing themselves with mixed reality and the potential of it, because I would argue that when we think about what those magical moments are going to be for consumers, when they have that aha of like, this is a place I want to invest in time and money and intellectual capital, I think mixed reality is going to come up from behind in that way.
Lindsay McInerney also suggested spending time with people who understand this. Spend time with your kids, spend time with your grandkids, spend time with your younger coworkers, people who are immersed in these spaces already. And the more you do that, the more you'll learn and the more you'll understand and be able to communicate those needs within your own organizations. Two of the draws of the immersive web are anonymity and the ability to create a digital persona with an avatar. More than half of people ages 13 to 34 say they're more comfortable being themselves in a virtual world than in real life, according to the Ipsos immersive study. And 43% of Americans aged 13 to 55 have created an avatar. Most people want their avatars to closely mirror their appearance or look like them with a few tweaks, says Natalie Lacey, the executive vice president of Ipsos' media and entertainment platforms business. That comfort and the ability to develop a meaningful virtual self is a key to onboarding most people into those spaces. And I say this as my daughter is itching to create a Bitmoji of me today after softball practice. We'll see how that goes. These tech challenges we've been talking about are all issues. Many will be overcome. But the World Economic Forum convenes world leaders on the biggest economic and social issues. Not surprisingly, the possibility of the metaverse falls into realms of looking at how new frontier technologies can transform society at large, says Kathy Lee, the head of media, entertainment, and sports. She contends that if the metaverse is developed in a more open and inclusive way, people will be more trusting of it and more open-minded about integrating it into their lives. Lee says the WEF today sees the metaverse not as a destination, but as a point in time in the ongoing digital transformation. It should be a fair representation of the real world, she says. And to that end, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a powerful solution that should be included now. That includes accessibility, she says. To get there, though, she says, product design will need to take accessibility into account from the start. Here's what she told Kate MacArthur in our interview.
You can hear some of the argument about accessibility is a virtual world in a way improves accessibility because many of the experiences that couldn't be fully experienced by disabled users in the past and now actually can be accessed through, for example, AR VR headsets and make sure that people embrace very similar experiences. So that's on one hand, that's the upside of it. And on the other hand, all of the product design will need to take all of this consideration into account from the very beginning.
This issue features many discussions about building safe and inclusive virtual spaces. But what will that look like? Ipsos researchers have interviewed hundreds of people who use VR regularly to access virtual worlds. And listening to those people has led to insights for brands and retailers alike as they shape the future. First, people want to feel that there's space for them to be who they are physically and emotionally. They want avatars to represent them accurately, including digital displaying their tooth gap, their prosthetic arm, or their gray patches in their hair, says Caitlin Fox, a research director at Ipsos's UX Experience. People also want to access virtual worlds like anyone else, with added system features to help them have an equitable experience that acknowledges and accepts their differences or limitations, she says. For example, those who have an auditory processing disorder or are hard of hearing may opt for features that allow them to control their individual user volume or display captions to ensure they can focus on conversations without feeling overwhelmed or left out. Finally, as in the real world, accessibility also means people of all backgrounds are treated respectfully and can enjoy their experience without feeling targeted. These are hard problems to solve in the real world, and will be a challenge to solve in virtual worlds populated by real-world people. But with intentional planning and testing, users and platforms alike hope we can get there. Entertainment media has been a relative laggard in engaging viewers through the metaverse. But that's primed to change, contends Vera Chien, who leads research for Warner Brothers Discovery on digital platforms such as HBO Max, as well as corporate strategy initiatives including NFTs. She sees audiences as more than ready for interactive and viewer-driven content. So far, many of Warner's metaverse activations have focused on audience engagement and promotion of NFTs, but she's excited by the demand she sees growing among younger audiences for merging the immersiveness of gaming into TV and films. This is something that audiences are craving, she says. Not that older audiences will be left behind. It's just cracking the nut for them, she adds. She too thinks that the tech will improve and more people will find themselves drawn into these spaces. She spoke with Kate MacArthur.
Right now, latency and processing power, compute power, are still a little bit limitations for us as to generate and rig a more, especially a more blocky animated character in some cases, is much simpler than rigging a lifelike rendering of a human. So I think we are still a ways from going from a more animated, simplified character and movements, especially in an environment that is live, is allowing for greater concurrency of number of users. All of these things are kind of essentially, I know I'm a little oversimplifying, but taxing the whole entire platform and system.
We're going to pivot a little bit here, and I want to emphasize something that's a theme you've heard a lot, and one of which futurists would recommend you pay attention to. She and Jonathan Stringfield and others today have talked about when, not if, the tech gets to a point that will make this a smoother experience for everyone. It's again like the early days of the internet. It will get better. New worlds will open up for us to imagine. And we can imagine doing amazing things with those worlds. Or, well, we can take another path. And that's one our next interview focused on. Andy Carvin is a long-standing, I don't say old, friend of mine. His old iPhone, which is actually old, on which he used social media to cover the Arab Spring uprisings for NPR, resides in the Smithsonian. He is a complex and fascinating dude, and was the perfect person to talk to hard pivot us back to what we like to call the real world. It's easy to get caught up in discussion about virtual worlds and forget that they have an impact in our real world as well. That intersection of reality and information is fraught today and could get worse in the future. Andy Carvin and his global team of researchers research the spread of disinformation in real time and trace its sources. Rampant disinformation is a problem that is arguably made worse by technology. Carvin thinks the solution, however, is human, and the window to solve it might very well be closing. We're not in a good place today, he says. The problem is larger, I think, than any of us are able to get our heads around, because there's no real barrier to entry, he says. Fact-checking can help, but it's a naturally defensive pose. By that point, the false narrative is already circulating. One solution, he suggests, could parallel the deprogramming efforts used in addiction recovery and rehabilitation by former gang members. But he worries that as we become more bubbled virtually and geographically, even that'll be harder to pull off. Plus, it'll be nearly impossible to scale the solution to fit the scale of the problem. He hopes that new tools will become available that use AI or machine learning to help people know what is real and what is fake. But that's not as easy as it sounds. Here's what he told me.
So I think tools like that are inevitable, but I think we're also in a cat and mouse game here in which bad actors who are creating new technologies or new methodologies for spreading disinformation, they pay attention to my work, my team's work. They read the latest research in journals that study information warfare.
So yeah, because his team's work is conducted in the open, transparently as one would suspect, it gives an opportunity for the bad guys to learn from it too. And as they become more proficient and the tools for disinformation get better and the cost of entry decreases, it's going to be a hard battle, which leaves Carvin and, well, me, worried.
People in my business are running out of ideas. I feel like I'm in the business of mitigating the effects and occasionally catching the bad guys in the act, so it raises the cost of them doing business or putting them out of business or whatever. But the broader effects of loss of trust, it's completely out of our control.
We try to stay hopeful in WTF land. But in a future where in reality we don't know what is real versus what is fake, or whether we're living in the Matrix, isn't necessarily a cheery one. And that's just one of the tensions we're talking about. We think of tensions as continuums, a way to measure a point in time and see where we are on an issue that's going to be critical to which future we steer ourselves towards. As we see those shifts, it hints at which potential future we're going to move towards. So here's where we are today on 6 tensions. We'll start with the big one. These tensions are especially tense. Tension 1. Given that the genesis of the metaverse is a form of dystopian science fiction, maybe we should take it as a good sign that people told us they don't want to hang out there. As we said, though, realistically, we will wind up spending more and more of our time in virtual spaces of some sort, likely shifting this tension line. What form that presence will take is up for grabs, and many of those interviewed in this issue see this near future with some sort of headset. More than one interview asked that field of dreams question about building it, will they come? Jonathan Stringfield reminds us that we might not need additional hardware anyway. He says game developers have been doing this for 60 years of experience, being very good at initiating spatial presence on a flat screen. Tension 2, branded spaces or unbranded? Most people say they don't want a branded experience in the metaverse, but it's hard to imagine a future where brands are absent, especially since they're there already. So what does this tension tell us? It tells us that brands have to make the experience worthwhile for the consumer. To do that, they need to understand what the consumer wants from them and how to deliver it in a new reality. Quote, the most important thing for a brand to do is to become fundamentally literate in what is necessary to build, says Meta's Asher Rapkin. Tension 3, government regulation? Nah. This is a really charged tension. Government regulation is a topic that is always fraught. In any context, the word regulation is a word that triggers. It's even more tricky where technology is concerned, because let's face it, Our elected leaders are not always very savvy. If government places some guardrails on the development of virtual spaces, it could lead to one future. If the industries involved are left to their own devices, no pun intended, it could be a very different future. Matthew Ball, author of The Metaverse, thinks we need a heavy hand, at least at the outset. He says, quote, "I believe that the role of government and the state must be fairly strong, especially in these early years." Tension 4. People are most bearish on the uses of augmented reality today in this tension between augmented reality improving or not. We'll see how that unfolds. But if this tension remains where it is, look to see more app-based and hardware-based solutions adopted more quickly than some of the virtual alternatives. Augmented reality, like virtual reality, can be used for much more than entertainment, which is where it's mostly centered now. Josh Shabty from Lowe's Innovation Lab says, quote, "We've explored the use of immersive technologies to walk people through the experience of a home project and give them the muscle memory to be able to complete it." How cool does that sound? Tension 5. Can I be myself or not? In the identity issue of What the Future, 78% of people said they've felt free to express their true identity in daily life. Far fewer here feel safe online. If this tension doesn't shift in a more positive direction, it'll have grave implications for the adoption of these new technologies and habits. Many in this issue and beyond are skeptical that we can solve some of the human obstacles, such as bullying in these new spaces. But others have hope, which we'll need in order to guide us to a place where people feel welcome and respected. Kathy Lee from the World Economic Forum says, quote, "There's a better chance for people to behave more civilized in the virtual world compared to the internet." We'll see how that all plays out. Our final tension is about what's true and what isn't. Today, most people feel that it's already difficult to tell what's real and what's fake on the internet. Technology has the power to make that better or much worse. It'll forever be a game of whack-a-mole until the underlying causes are cured. Andy Carvin from the Atlantic Council says that we need human solutions to make disinformation less attractive to bad actors. He says, quote, "Disinformation is an enormous problem, but the loss of trust within our culture and within our institutions is what's allowing it to happen." So where could the future take us? We're going to offer up two plausible futures of reality. In the first, imagine it's 2032. Virtual reality is a place where more people are spending more time, but not as many as some would have hoped or expected. The problems caused by bubbles and bad behavior from Web 2, the social media area, carry over. The metaverse especially is a place where some find entertainment and others discomfort. The issue of comfort and identity is going to be either a barrier or a gateway toward onboarding people in a meaningful way into new realities. Getting to the latter requires a combination of the ability to craft an identity that feels right, and for creators and influencers is fully brandable and unique, and a set of social norms. Gaming and entertainment continue to be driving forces in the adoption of these technologies. Practical applications, like workplace trainings and meetings, like learning and practicing new skills, also have grown. So we drift into these spaces. More of us spend more time. Many spend a lot of time. Partially, we're following this dystopian origin of the story of the metaverse, that as the physical climate becomes less habitable, virtual spaces are an escape. But partially the tech advances, and all this stuff is just cool. In some applications, it's fun, like virtual travel and connecting with friends we can't be with physically. In others, it's useful, like augmented navigation and shopping. But it's still not for everyone. The metaverse is especially not an inclusive place that everyone dreamed of in 2021. People are harassed, some never feel comfortable, or drawn to smaller, niche immersive communities that don't become the mainstream draw that some Web 2 platforms had enjoyed. The metaverse hasn't yet reached its transformative potential, and many wonder if it will. That's one possibility. Now, think about it back to our tensions. And let's consider that tension about expressing yourself freely. Suppose that shifts. Let's say people become more comfortable expressing themselves online. That the 52 today who say they feel comfortable online starts to look more like the 78% from our identity issue who say they're comfortable in their daily life expressing their identity. That seems like a future worth working toward. It was a question we asked most, if not all, of the people interviewed in this issue, and they all acknowledged the challenges. But they also said it was an important aspect to focus on, and they had concrete plans for bringing people together to create the technology ultimately needed to fix what is fundamentally a human problem. But if we're more comfortable in reality than in virtual spaces today, it seems like there's plenty of room for hope. So if that waypoint shifts, it could point us toward a different plausible future. So again, imagine it's 2032, but people now feel more comfortable expressing themselves in virtual spaces. How did that happen? Perhaps it was a broad group working together toward a needed solution. Perhaps it was strong regulation. Perhaps we all sorted into different metaverses that suited us and made us feel safe. Regardless, we're here now, and we're making the most of it all. In the early to mid-20s, that would be 2020s, the development of the metaverse in all its complexity kept creating safe and inclusive spaces at the forefront. And again, whether we're in one or several huge metaverses or a constellation of metaverses, here we are. Similarly, we're using AR all the time in our lives, perhaps through a contact lens interface or projected from our phones. Virtual spaces are places where we connect, places where we are entertained, places that enable workplace collaboration, places that train us, places that show us the real world, places where we enjoy spending time, but also reinforce the value of real things in the physical world. We have brand experiences here, not just shopping and not just reproductions of physical retail, but that too. But new ways of forging relationships and communities around the brands we care about. The blockchain is part of that, allowing for unique and customized experiences in our entertainment and the way we express our identity. This all comes to pass because the technology stopped being a barrier, yes, but also everyone involved acted with intention toward a future where we all feel safe. Tensions, plausible ports, our early territory map, these are all tools we use to think about the future. And they're tools that we like to use in creating a what the future. Another is the future jobs to be done. A traditional jobs to be done framework focuses on the tasks and outcome that people are trying to accomplish when they hire products and services to help them achieve that outcome. So we don't buy a VR headset, we hire one for entering virtual worlds and events. We don't buy augmented reality apps, we hire them for learning or shopping or entertainment. Ipsos takes this theory forward with the future jobs to be done, where we envision these future scenarios through strategic foresight. And these scenarios help us define the circumstances that people might find themselves in, like in a virtual world. Sophie Washington, who's a senior consultant with Ipsos Strategy 3, created these future jobs to be done for us. 1. It's a world where Web 2 social media networks grew from real-world communities and algorithms and later connected strangers to widened networks. So in this world, you meet your best friend in a small-scale virtual community of people seeking relief from climate-induced gut health issues. And in that world, there are potential futures jobs to be done about finding people to relate to, helping me not be siloed in communities with a singular world outlook, like a political world outlook, and helping me feel included and welcome. These are all jobs around a very human need to find my people and communities. Or we have jobs around helping me live in the best of both worlds, a world where you book a trip, a day trip, to virtually hike the Andes Mountains, but realize you don't have the space or terrain to physically hike in your small urban apartment. So jobs involve helping me seamlessly transition from the real world activities and virtual world activities and stay balanced and healthy so I don't feel out of touch with either reality. Or there's a world where we need to learn how to trust others. Learning what's real and what's not real has been a recurring theme of this. So in this world, imagine that tonight you've decided to go to Anonymous with binge watching that new interactive and immersive reality show set in Fiji. And tomorrow you'll log on as your official verified self for work. And we have these jobs about creating comfortable operating and preferred immersive web environments and helping me feel protected from people who don't have good intentions. These are, again, powerful tools to help us thinking about the future. And why do we do that? I always like to close with this quote, that when you imagine possible tomorrows, you ask better questions today. The more you stretch the way you're thinking about your company's problems, the more you imagine all of the world around us, the more you see how your industry, your sector, your brand fits into the larger future, and the more you project yourself outward, the better research you're going to do today, the better questions you're going to ask, the better you're going to understand the humans around you and how to fill their needs. So I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed The Future of Reality. You can get the issue online at future.ipsos.com. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. It's free. You will get the next issue, which is going to be the future of spending. We're going to be diving into all of the different ways that the economy and the retail world are going to come together. I can't wait to show it to you. It'll be out in a couple weeks, and if you sign up, you'll be the first to get it. So again, I'm Matt Carmichael. I'm the editor of What the Future. Thank you so much for coming out. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you learned from it. I hope you've given a lot of thought to where these worlds can go and how we'll participate in it, and where your brands and companies and selves and kids and families and all these new things we can create fit in. Thanks so much for coming out. Again, you can get everything at future.ipsos.com. It's been great to have you.